recording, so if you don't want to be on the recording, make sure you hit that little camera button down there so your face is not showing. But Jason is hitting record here in a minute, or have you hit record? Okay, we hit record. We are recording now, just for everyone. So I can post a link for the recording later this evening as well.
Thank
but
you.
we did that today. All right, we can start. So welcome to our third Active Learners, everyone, and thanks for joining us for those who have not yet. Hi, Lynn, it's good to see your face. But welcome. I'll turn it over to Roger to introduce who our guest speaker is today, and enjoy.
Thank you, Brittany. Today we have the privilege of David Steere, who has been here for a number of years, not as many as I have, but David has some great background in alternative energy, among other things. And Dave, tell us about solar. We're ready to listen.
Oh, super. Well, I have a solar installed in my house here in Tehaleh, and I had another one in my former house in Florida. And I'm an enthusiast, but I don't unhesitatingly say that you also jump out and buy solar for your house. And I'll try to point out the good and the bad. The first thing I want to do here is make sure that you understand that this is not a commercial ad for anything. I don't work for Joe's solar company, and I don't stand to make a commission on anything. And if you buy solar, that's between you and the solar company, and I don't have anything to do with it. I will add that I offer that I've been fiddling around with things like this for years and have some experience and maybe a little knowledge, and might be able to help you with your decision if you decide you want to go ahead and install solar or even want to consider installing solar. It seems that what happens when you go online, and maybe you've run into this, if you type in solar in Washington or what are the benefits of solar or something like that, you immediately start getting email from hundreds of solar companies trying to give you a hard sell. And it's kind of hard to avoid, but there is one company, and I'll get to it a little later, and they are called yes, somebody say something? Okay. EnergySage.com, EnergySage.com. You might want to write that down. And they are basically a broker. Now, they do make it's not really a commission, but they get paid by installers all over the country and around the world to try to make their standards. And if they can be accepted as an Energy Sage member, then Energy Sage will tie you to specific, like a broker, they'll tie you to a specific sales guy, and you don't get inundated with a whole lot of sales calls. So anyway, I have lots of opinions, but they're worth about zero. I also want to make a political statement up front, and that is that I would like to avoid political discussions to the extent that we can. There's a lot of politics involved in things like global warming and carbon offsets, and whether or not state, local, and federal government should be paying you incentives to tell you how to run your life and things like that. If it's agreeable with everybody, let's avoid topics like that, okay? I want to talk about another limitation I have is that I'm a technical guy. All my education and background and professional experience has been in the field of electronics and as a naval officer, just general operations. And I'm not a financial person. I'm definitely not a marketing person. So if we get into the financial discussion, I hesitate to get very deep into things like break-even analysis and things like that, because people are a heck of a lot smarter than that. And so you're going to challenge anything I say financially. And so I will share openly what I paid, what I think it will cost you, and I will talk a little bit about what the incentives are, and I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out if it makes sense. So I'm not going to come to a bottom line that says, yes, you should do this. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is Say yes? Somebody interrupt, I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe if we mute mics, it might help because I keep hearing interference now and then. There are a number of options for alternative energy, and Marty was kind enough to suggest to me that I go to a website related to some research that's just been done at Washington State University regarding alternative energy, and renewable energy is the term they like to use. Apparently they have a new academic field called energy engineering, and renewable energy refers to the four things that I listed plus one thing. So ways you can go about doing alternative or renewable energy, whereas you can harness the wind, you can use geothermal. Some of these things don't work everywhere. Clearly, the one that works around here is hydroelectric energy, which doesn't work in Florida with a boot, and solar. So those are the ones we're going to talk entirely about: solar, photovoltaic. Although solar hot water may make sense, and it's a lot easier, cheaper, and can be the highest payoff for some folks. So if you have for example, if you have a hot tub, or not many of us have swimming pools here, but that's another alternative too. Or just your regular hot water. We have on-demand hot water here, which is a real good way to go with gas fire. But you can actually augment that with a great deal of work with solar panels on your roof, and it can actually pay dividends on your bill. But today we're going to talk strictly about solar photovoltaic, if that makes sense. Okay, so before we do that, we've got to get a few terminology issues down. A lot of, and the most important one is the second one listed here, and that's efficiency. Anybody here who has ever studied engineering knows that the Greek letter eta, which shows after the word efficiency, it looks like a lowercase n with a little curly Q at the bottom on the right. This isn't exactly an eta. It was the closest I could find on my add symbol menu on my computer. But eta refers to a comparison of what energy you get out of something compared to what energy went in. Or you can also use the same thing with power. Since energy is simply power integrated over time, or if you try to keep it real simple, it's power times time. So when you buy energy from the power company, even when you call the power company and ask for help in interpreting your bill, which I've done numerous times, and I still don't understand how to read the bill, they use incorrectly the term, oh, you bought so many kilowatts last month, and you produced so many kilowatts last month, and it's the difference between them. Okay, well, that's nonsense. It's not kilowatts, that's power. Kilowatts over, if I ask you, for example, if you run your microwave oven, and it takes 1 kilowatt, which is a typical number, 900 and some watts, to operate your microwave oven in your kitchen, the question is, how much does it cost? Well, that's not enough data. If you run your kilowatt oven for 1 minute, it doesn't cost much at all for the energy. You run it for 24 hours a day for 30 days, it's going to cost you a bundle. So the energy is a product of power and time. Or more properly, for those of you who are mathematically inclined, so I lost him here. He was here earlier, but Carl, who is a math whiz and taught it for years, would take great exception to my saying energy is the product of time and power. It is actually the integral with respect to time. So it's power times time, integral of dt, if you must be specific. But if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry. Energy and power are a matter of power over time is energy, okay? So it's important that we understand that. We should know that volts, amps, watts, and watt hours are all terms we're going to throw around, and we need to have at least a fundamental understanding. And I'll get a little bit into the history of things, but it's quite interesting to know that Galvani, who was an Italian, cut open cats and frogs and determined that his buddy, Darson Vall, who was a Frenchman, made a coil and attached it to a lodestone, which is a piece of metal that's on a bearing that can swing left and right. And he was inventing what is now called the galvanometer, or more generally, the amp meter. So ampere was in the same time frame, in the late 1800s, was a guy that built upon his friend Coulomb. Coulomb found that if you walk across a room and touch a radiator, you get a spark and it shocks you. And so he, of course, named the unit of charge the Coulomb. Ampere came along and said, well, if there's coulombs moving along somebody's nerve inside a frog or a squid, well, then there must be coulombs per second, and that's what an ampere is. And then along came Volta, another Italian, and he put together the idea, well, energy does happen, or you can measure current in a galvanometer in a frog or even in a person perhaps, and it might have something to do with how your heart beats or when you contract a muscle or something. We don't really understand any of that stuff, but Volta came along with another idea, and that was if I put dissimilar metals in seawater or other electrolytes, later came to be called, I could create what we now call a battery. So at the time they were called voltaic piles, and by hooking different numbers of voltaic piles together in what we now call series, he could create different amounts of voltage. Of course, everybody was vain and wanted to have everything bear their name forever and ever. So what we now call the volt is you can think of it as a unit of pressure. It causes current, amperes, which are coulombs per second, to flow down a conductor to a resistor, which is named for our buddy Ohm. George Ohm, George spelled without an E on the end, who was a German, who came along and said he would take, like most scientists, would take an object out of his drawer, like a pencil, a hunk of wood, a piece of plastic, a piece of ceramic perhaps, maybe a hunk of aluminum, a piece of copper, something like that. And he did an experiment by hooking up voltaic piles to whatever this object was, connecting it to a galvanometer. He found that the more voltaic piles he put in series, the more amperes would flow. And so he found the constant of proportionality between voltage and current was resistance. And of course it bears his name, V equals I times R. R is a resistor. Now R isn't always linear. You can have a resistor that does a little curve upwards like a diode does, but it still has the relationship, the more voltage you have, the more current. Okay, so if we have those concepts down, we can talk more about the different systems we can do. I want to talk also a little bit about that one more time. Efficiency is not the term that we use all the time in day-to-day language. For example, saying, well, my secretary is a very efficient worker. After all, she can talk on the phone and type on the typewriter or on the computer at the same time, and she can file things all at once. That's not efficiency. That's just being able to multitask. Efficiency is a comparison. If you can either create nor destroy energy in an object, take a loudspeaker, for example, that's a transducer. It takes energy in one form and converts it to another. So it takes electrical energy, makes it into sound energy. A microphone just does the opposite. If it makes sound energy by talking, it goes into a microphone and makes little minuscule electric currents that get amplified and become attached to a speaker and become, each one of these devices can have the power in divided by the power out, the other way around. Power out divided by the power in is the efficiency. It's a very, very important concept. The reason an electric car is so much better, another of my favorite topics, so much better than a gasoline car, is because electric motors can be made to be 95, 99% efficient. Whereas the gasoline internal combustion engine, the very best you can achieve is about 22% efficiency. What it really is a pump. And it's a great deal of heat, and at the same time, it makes a little mechanical energy. So those are all concepts that engineers talk about all the time. How do I make something more efficient? And we'll talk about that more as we go into solar. I've gone over the history slide, and it's an eye test, so don't worry about it. The main thing to understand about the history of solar is that it goes way, way, way back. As a matter of fact, there are several ancient manuscripts that date back to both in China and in several cultures in Europe, where they talked about using what they call burning mirrors, which must have been some form of a magnifying glass or something, to focus on a torch. And then the torch would say, in those days, everything that couldn't be explained was assigned to religion. So God must have done this. And so what they did was they used their ability to start a fire on a torch to conduct religious ceremonies. So that's one of the first applications of solar power that we've ever heard of. Not very efficient, was it? Anyway, the story is, and I doubt that it's true, but it's a great story. It's a Navy story, so I like it. And it had to do with the Greek army in about 250 BC is said to have used their bronze shields. Like most soldiers, they spent untold hours polishing their bronze and their brass and their leather boots, like soldiers tend to do and sailors. And they made them very, very shiny. And then they put them in a shape, supposedly. Now, others have questioned this, saying it couldn't possibly have happened because convex mirrors have never been invented yet. But nevertheless, they're said to have done this, and it makes a great story. They focused the energy from the sun and directed it at the sails of incoming amphibious landings of Roman ships and caused the ships to burn and saved all of Greece. Now, is it a true story? Who knows, but it's a great one. And then in the back in the time that I was talking about earlier, where Volta, Galvani, Ampere, D'Argenval, Coulomb, and some of the others, Watts, all those guys were working. Another guy that was working was playing around with electrodes in a solution, doing kind of the same thing that we talked about earlier when we were measuring that Ohm was making his measurements, trying to invent the Ohm unit. Becquerel was doing this with pieces of metal in solution, and he found that in some cases, when the sun was bright, the amount of current flowing was different, and he never understood that. He certainly noted it in his journal, but nobody could explain it. A few years later, an American by the name of William Smith was also experimenting with metals in solution, and the metal that he chose to work with was selenium. And I can remember as a young boy, I used to take radios apart and sometimes managed to get them back together again. Shocked the heck out of myself numerous times. And I discovered something called a selenium rectifier. And it was explained to me that this was much better than a vacuum tube. Back to the efficiency discussion. A vacuum tube rectifier works, but it's only about 50 to 60% efficient. It takes a great deal of heat to burn the filament to make the electrodes hot enough to pass current. And so someone had invented selenium, and that was my introduction to the idea of selenium rectifiers. And when I looked it up today, nobody mentions any use like rectifiers at all. Selenium is a trace mineral that's used to as an antioxidant in the body, and I'm way beyond my ability to talk about medical stuff, so I'll leave it at that. But at the time, selenium was something that was, I would guess, available, and they experimented with it. And it wasn't until 1883 that Charles Fritz, another American, patented a selenium cell that actually created energy from merely shining sunlight on. This particular cell was only 1% efficient, but it was so exciting that they patented it and actually used it to turn a little small fan with an electric motor. And that was the first application that I could find of real solar power being used for something useful. In 1954, a great deal of examination was going on in Bell Labs. This is about the time the transistor was invented. But before that, people were playing around with silicon, gallium arsenide, and germanium, which my wife keeps making fun of me for. I keep talking about her beautiful germaniums in the garden, but no, it's a different, it's something different. Germanium and silicon, and all these were, as Ohm would have, when Ohm was doing his experiment, comparing voltage and current with different objects, he classified all objects as either being one of three categories. One was those things where the curve was very, very steep. In other words, a little tiny bit of voltage, a whole lot of current, and that made for conductors. Okay, so gold, silver, aluminum, steel, various other metals are considered really good conductors, whereas wood, ceramic, other devices like that are very poor conductors, and so they're called insulators. So things are either insulators or conductors in Ohm's time, but everything in between, those, if you look at that curve of volt versus amperes, there's just a little tiny sliver of things that are called conductors way down at the bottom, or at the top of the curve, and things that are called insulators at the bottom. and everything in between was called semiconductors. They didn't know what they were, but they were neither conductors nor insulators. And so in Bell Labs, they found that if you put impurities into things like silicon or germanium, you could actually get very strange behavior. And one thing was it would pass current in only one direction. So they invented a new kind of rectifier that replaced selenium rectifiers, and they replaced vacuum tube rectifiers. So that was quite exciting to them. And they left their experiment out on the workbench and went home with a dirty workbench, came in the morning and flipped on the fluorescent lights, and all the current changed. And it blew them away. I've read a very interesting, funny article about it. And they started saying, George, did you change something? Did you flip something around? Anyway, it turned out what they had invented was a solar cell that used selenium, or used silicon as the element. And to this day, that's how it's done for the majority of elements of silicon solar cells. And then in the 1960s, the space exploration got in high gear, and solar cells became really, really important to them, because it was you couldn't pack enough gasoline or diesel fuel or even batteries on a satellite to have it do anything useful. And so they found ways to collect data from the energy from the sun, and they got the efficiency all the way up to maybe 6 or 7%, which is still awful. But still, that's what they did. And by 1973, the first solar house was demonstrated in Delaware, and the whole house was powered. Of course, it didn't have very much light or no heat, and not very much by way of stoves or anything else, but did have some devices, appliances in the house that could be operated strictly from solar cells. Now today, jumping forward, the theoretical maximum in efficiency that can be achieved by a solar cell is about 34%. When I used to teach this stuff in school, and what I would tell my students is, if you want to make your fortune as an engineer, as an electrical engineer, the two areas I recommend you specialize in are, one, making solar cells more efficient, and two, making batteries that last longer, weigh less, and can be charged more times. And so a great deal of work is being done in both those fields, but we're miles from achieving success. So the cost per watt, remember watt is a unit of power, it's the voltage times the current, okay? The cost per watt in the 1950s was about $350. By 1975, when the first solar house was now operational, and a couple of pioneer engineers actually tried putting solar cells in their house back in the early 70s. At the time, it was about $100 per watt developed power. Today, I just read yesterday, or when I was doing research here, that in the state of Washington, it's about $2.83 per watt. So if you want to get a lot of watts of power on your roof, it's going to cost you about $2.83 per watt. Frankly, that I paid more than that. And I'll get more into detail on my installation, but my house in Florida, which was done I installed it about 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but it had 5 kilowatts. That's 5,000 watts of power, and it cost me $33,000, and it took 24 cells, 24 solar cells on my roof to make 5,000 watts, and it cost $33,000. Just keep those numbers in mind. When I talk about my house here, when we got here, I installed only 20 panels. I had 24 panels before, making 5,000 watts. Here I'm making 6,000 watts with only 20 panels. So that's the efficiency at work. The efficiency has gone up. More energy out for a given amount of energy in. So when I moved in the last 8 years, when I moved from Florida to here, the price went down by $10,000 and the power went up by 5,000 watts. But my system cost $3.89 per watt, $23,000, and that is after I paid taxes, 9-point-something% sales tax, and that's before I applied the incentives, which I'll tell you about a little later. Here's more detail about my installation here, so you can keep this in mind. It's actually coming down all the time. It costs a little bit less now than when I did. My solar installation, which as I mentioned is 20 panels, 6 kilowatts, uses micro-inverters. Well, we forgot to mention inverters at the beginning. Inverter is a device that takes DC power. For instance, the car battery in your car will give you 12 volts DC. If you want to run your, I don't know, say your charger for your laptop computer and plug it into 120 volts AC, you have to use a device called an inverter. It takes the 12 volts DC and through electronic magic, it's a sine wave, and it produces power at AC, constantly changing voltage and amperage, changing 60 times every second. So that's what an inverter is. And we'll talk a little more about inverters because you have several options. If you want to use your solar array on your house to run things inside, you can run everything on 12 volts DC if you want. And some people do this in their mobile homes. They use a solar panel on the roof, a couple panels, and then they have 12 volt light bulbs and 12 volt radios and 12 volt this and 12 volt that. They all run on DC and they don't need an inverter. But in our houses, everybody, and this is thanks to Tesla, who had a battle with Edison, and he won. Tesla won. It's a good thing he did. Everything in our house runs on AC. And AC is quite different from DC, so we need an inverter to make DC into AC. My installation uses micro-inverters on the roof, so every panel makes DC, but right away it gets converted to AC. What comes down the wires to my panel is AC power, and that's good because it requires smaller wires and is better for graceful degradation. In other words, I can lose one panel and the rest of them continue to work. Whereas, so lose one microinverter, which happened to me in Florida, by the way. I monitor all the time how my array is doing, and I got an email, or a text or something, that said, you know, panel number 13 just failed. You're getting zero power out of it. And I went to check it out, and sure enough, the inverter failed. If I had a single inverter down in my garage, the way many people do, if the inverter had failed, which happens, you know, they're electronic devices, they can blow a fuse, they can have a resistor burnout or a capacitor go bad, then you've lost the entire system. So there's an advantage to having microinverters, and there's also an advantage to having one inverter. So there's it's a controversial issue. Not everybody agrees, but you do need to have an inverter. Trying to go to the next page. So if you pay $33,000 for your set, for your installation or something like that, it won't cost you that much. Well, I didn't get to that. Let me go back to one page. Okay. So my gross cost for my installation was $23,362. But in my day, like 2 years ago or 15 months ago, I got to get a 30% federal tax rebate. So when I submitted my taxes that year, and I had whopping taxes because I had a capital gain from selling my house and other things like that, I got to apply a $6,400 out of $12. That's not a write-off on my gross income, on my net income. It is actually a write-off on my taxes, one for one. So that's a good deal. It actually reduces the cost of my total installation of my solar by about $6,400. Unfortunately, that incentive has gone down from 30% now to 26% this year. Next year it goes to 22%, and for years after that, no incentive at all. So if you're going to make the choice to do this, you probably ought to do it in the fairly near future. So then in my case, I got production incentives, and I've tried to investigate this in the state of Washington, and I'm not sure how it stands today because I get different answers. The salespeople from various solar installers paint a very rosy picture and say, it's real, man, you're going to get paid for a whole bunch every kilowatt hour of energy you produce, which I am. I'm getting paid 18 cents per kilowatt hour for 8 years, which is a very good deal because when Puget Sound sells me energy, it's about 9.02 cents. So I'm getting twice the price they get for producing my energy in the form of a rebate. And I got a check last September, which helped. It was very much appreciated. This year, I'm not sure what the numbers are or even if it's available at all. So you'll have to check out for yourself to see if that's still available. You could say, and the salesmen people do quite willingly, that my net cost for my system instead of $23,000 was only $4,000. Now it's starting to make sense. But I caution you, be careful. I don't want to get into politics too much here, as I mentioned. But I've been burned, And one of the times I was burned was in Florida. Instead of paying you for production, they actually pay you a one-time price at installation. So I didn't install, when I built my house, it had every extra I could think of to make it energy efficient. But I didn't install solar back then because it just cost too much. I just couldn't make it work at the end of my pencil. But when I read in the paper that the state of Florida was offering me $4 per watt up to 5,000 watts. So that's $20,000 if I installed solar. And so I jumped on it. And after passing all their requirements, I had to go through their approved installers rather than do it myself, and had to go through all their inspections and all that other stuff. I thought, wow, I'm going to get my $20,000 check, and then it's going to be great. In the meantime, I borrowed against my life insurance because I didn't have that much money handy. And I spent $33,000 to install my solar. And then I contacted my state elected representative who lived out right down the road from me, knew him very well. And I said, hey, Jimmy, where's my check? And he said, sorry, you don't have any money. So I caution you to be very careful about promises you get from government. And that's enough politics. So Washington incentives. There's another concept here that really is important to understand if you're considering solar, and that is net metering. Net metering is actually pretty simple, but there's a lot of big words that are used to make it all sound very mysterious. But basically what net metering means is, the best way to think about this is, if you had an old-fashioned meter, which none of us do anymore, but if you look on the side of your house, remember the little dials that would twirl around and around and around? If you're producing energy and hook it back to the grid, the meter runs backwards. So for every watt hour of energy that I make, the meter goes backwards and subtracts from what I get delivered to me. Okay, that's not really how it works, but that's how it used to work. You can think of that as how net metering works. In other words, if I take 1,000 watt hours from 1 kilowatt hour from the provider, from Puget Sound Energy, and I produce 500 watt hours with my solar, then I only pay for 500 watts of watt hours of energy. Now understand that that's another big risk, and this is to me, with my take on, I told you I stay away from politics, I'm entering it once again, but as you're considering whether you should do solar or not, I think the biggest risk of all is net metering, because right now I'm being paid at the same rate that Puget Sound charges me for energy. When I give them a watt, they pay me the same amount that I have to pay them when I take a watt from them, a watt hour. So that's a good deal, because they have all the infrastructure to pay for. They've got people to pay salaries, and they've got a fleet of trucks. They've got to maintain towers and generating equipment, all that stuff, and I don't have any of that stuff to pay for. I paid for my installation once, and so they should probably be paying me back at a price lower than what I pay them. And so, believe it or not, they breathe in their senator's ear all the time. And in some states, notably Nevada and a couple of others, they used to have net metering like we have, and now they have no net metering at all. And this is after people have actually installed expensive solar systems based on the promise from government to be paid back. Since the company that provides our energy is totally controlled by government, it's very, very closely controlled, like the banking industry. He can't make any decisions at all about what things cost or how much I charge and so on. It's all determined by government. So naturally, the senator is going to listen in some cases to what the power companies tell them about how they're going to have to change the rules for net metering, and it could happen any day. But right now, it's a very good deal, and it reduces my cost considerably. As you'll see in a minute, my bills are quite low for electric. So, is solar in Washington a good idea? My first impression when I moved here from Florida, after all, Florida is the Sunshine State. My first impression was, gosh, Washington, isn't that where it rains all the time? It's always overcast, blah, 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 blah. It turns out there are two things that make solar very attractive in Washington. One thing is efficiency of solar panels goes up as the temperature. Okay, so efficiency is inversely proportional to temperature. So Arizona has a lot more sunlight, perhaps, but it's a lot hotter out in the desert, and so their panels don't produce as much power or energy per panel as ours do because it's cooler here. The second thing to consider is we are at a very high latitude compared to most of the country. And that means our days of sunlight in the summer are much longer. So what really means everything for a solar installation, whether it makes sense or not, is how many hours per day can you count on a good sun coverage. And when you get a solar salesman to come into your house, it's a good thing to do, by the way. And in fact, it's a necessary thing to do because he's a lot smarter than I am about all aspects of this. And he can put a device on your roof that literally, it's a very smart device. And he can tell whether the trees are too close and have too much shade. It can predict what the solar coverage will be in different months. You know, in our December, January, February, as I'll show you in a minute, it's terrible. But we really more than make up for it in June, July, and so forth. So he can predict a lot of things about how much solar coverage you're going to get and what the temperature is going to be and so forth. He can help explain, but he's going to be very rosy, I warn you, about his predictions. Now, it's awfully hard to see the numbers here. I'm just going to go over real quickly. And honestly, I can't decipher my bill with a hoot now. And I found out that the people I got referred 3 times to somebody else after she kept asking difficult questions of the person entering, how do I read my bill? And all 3 of them finally gave up and said, I don't know. But nevertheless, I'll try to explain it as best I can. On the top left, you'll see what's called your total usage of electricity. You don't have to read the numbers. It's hard to read, but there's a little green bar graph on the left. You'll see that for May, June, July, August, September, October, and November, it was 0. That's odd. Well, it turns out in those months, I was making more energy than I was using, and so they charged me nothing. So as far as they're concerned, I used no energy at all those months. And then you see in the months of December, January, February, and March, I had to pay a little bit, but it wasn't much. It worked out to, you know, just a few kilowatt hours of energy because I was still producing energy. And the graph on the bottom left deals with oil, or gasoline. We're not going to deal with that. You'll see that my total bill, including oil and everything, last month was $59. And my bill for electricity was $7.49. And you said, but Dave, you lied. You said it was free. No, nothing's free. It turns out they have a minimum charge every month. Now, if they hook me up to their grid, I have to pay $7.49 every single month for that privilege. And so every month, that's what most months, that is, let's see, June, July, August, September, October, I pay $7.49 a month. Other months, I pay a minuscule amount for electricity because I still made electricity. We also have a concept on the second page of the bill, up at the top, the part that says residential 7, I finally decoded that one. That means how much energy did you use? I'm on billing scale, billing cycle 7, or whatever that means. It means something to them, but not to me. And I asked them point blank, how much does energy cost here? And what am I paying for energy? And they start giving me all this crap about, you know, energy surcharges and this and that. And so it's made as complicated as it can possibly be. But the bottom line is it costs about 9 cents per kilowatt. You can't get that information off the bill. The second part says returned, and that's, as it says, that's how much energy did I send back to the grid. And the third part reads production. How much energy did I produce? So last month, I produced 631 kilowatt hours. I returned 446 kilowatt hours, and I used 299. All those numbers won't mean much to you other than I produced a lot more than I used. And so it all went in the bank. If you go down the bill a little bit, you'll find that my bank now has 141 kilowatt hours of energy waiting for next month, so that when I use some energy next month, we're going to pay for it with those kilowatt hours in the bank. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Next, when you install solar, there are different brands, and I had a different system than I had in Florida than I have here, but it's almost all the same. I can actually monitor every single cell on my roof, and you can see on the upper left, I've got 20 cells showing there, and each one is almost completely two-blocked when it comes to how much energy it's making. It's at about 80+% of capacity. So I'm making, each cell is capable of making 300 watts, and they're each making 247, 243, 245, 206, 244, and so forth. The lowest one was 206. And then if you go out and look at that instant, you'll see that there's a tree casting shade on that one panel, or maybe a bird dropped by and landed or dropped some poop on it or something. But you can find out your performance per cell that way, solar cell. And then the next graph it will give you is how is it on the lower left. You can see how is it doing hour by hour. You can see at 5 o'clock in the morning, not so well, but by 10 o'clock a.m., it was up to, I can't read the numbers myself, it was about 2 kilowatts of energy of power being produced at that moment. And by the time it got to be about 10:44 in the morning, I was up to about 5 kilowatts of power, which is nearly as much as my system will make. And then over to the right, you can see what it is. That's net energy in the week. So I can see what it was, per day. And then I can go on the upper right and I can see what it was hourly on the bar chart. And on the lower right, you can see what it was over a period of time. You can see there that on the 24th of April, we had a really lousy solar day. It was really overcast and rainy all day. But on the 7th of June, man, I was making 6 kilowatt hours of energy each hour. So in a day, I was making, I can get about 5 or 6 hours of good sunlight on a good day. And so that's what it was doing, making 30 kilowatt hours per day. So when you decide that you want to do kilowatt hours of energy in your house, which you don't have to pay for, you have 3 ways to do it, and I've actually shown 4 on my view graph. The first way is you go completely off the grid. You tell GoPower, nope, not GoPower, that's my company in Florida, sorry. You tell Puget Sound Energy, hey, take your $7.49 and go pound sand, I don't want it. And you make all the energy you want for your house. But guess what? Sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's overcast. You can't have energy whenever you want it. So you're going to have to find some way to store that energy to use in times when you don't have good sunlight. That means you're going to have batteries. The system I've talked to so far has been net metering, which uses the grid as your battery. Does that make sense? In other words, when I'm making more energy than I'm using, I'm sending it back, and the guy next door might be running his air conditioning. He's using the energy I produce in my solar cells to run his air conditioning. So that's my battery. Well, it's, if the grid goes down, like the other night with a lightning strike or some car drives by and hits a power pole or something like that, my battery is no good to me anymore. Matter of fact, by law, I can connect my solar cells on my roof to anybody, because I might go back and power the power line. Some guy working on the power line try to fix the problem, I get electrocuted by my solar cells. So my battery isn't ideal. It only works when the grid works. So the second way to do it is called net metering 1. The first way is to be completely independent of the grid. The second way is to use net metering 1, I'm calling it, where I have N solar panels, in my case 20. I think in Barney's case there's 30 of them, aren't there? Something like that. Yeah, 30. So he's got a bigger system than mine, and better in some ways. But he has a single inverter, as opposed to I have 10 inverters, 1 for every 2 panels. And my system in Florida had 24 inverters. So, more to pay for it up front, but, there's pros and cons to any way to do it. In either case, you have to have inverters, you have to have N solar panels, and then you sell back to the grid. But then there's a 4th alternative, which is really a hybrid between the top 2. And that is, Tesla makes it, and there are several other companies that are kind of introducing this, and I think might be even available commercially. And Tesla will sell you a variant of the batteries in my car to hang on your wall. And my car has 7,000 batteries in it. Each one is about a little larger than a penlight cell, and each one is managed by a very, very complex system that keeps the battery safe, and you can't overcharge a battery, and you can't draw too much current out of any battery at one time. It has a heat pump and liquid cooling and all. It's a very, very complex system. And Tesla has taken a derivative of that and made it available to people to hang on their wall. And it really, really works, but it's incredibly expensive. So the way that works is you can charge your car from what's on the wall, or you run your house on, have no power at all coming from the grid, or you can use the grid to charge your batteries, or there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And it's really, really a nice system, but it's quite expensive, and I can go into more detail for anybody that's interested. I don't know that anybody's interested in going that far for solar here. But boy, I really considered it seriously because I love it. It's a beautiful system engineering. So we talked about inverters. I'll just skip right over that. This is the best picture I could get of my home. I had to climb. Brittany, don't throw me in jail. I was out the other day, and I had to leave the trail to climb down on the hill to get a shot of my solar panel. Even then, you can't see much. There's trees in the way. But there's the 20 panels up on the roof, and you can see it leaves quite a bit of space on the roof for more panels if I need them. And what I'll share with you, which I might get in trouble for, is there's actually a 21st panel. I put my own panel in there as a separate system above and beyond what the other 20 panels do for me. And I'll go into a little detail about them, but not much, because I know it's boring to. But I have two different battery systems in my house that I use. And there's only one other ham radio operator in the group, I think, and he might be interested. The rest of you are probably bored silly by it. I actually power my ham radio station entirely with solar. And I do that because my interest in ham radio kind of waned over the years. I was very active from the time I was in high school up until about 10 years ago. And then I found out I could do everything with my cell phone that you can do with a ham radio. And man, I can make long distance calls practically for free, and I can do all the other things that I used to do with ham radio. But the one thing I missed was the technical stuff. I was inventing stuff and experimenting with stuff like that. So, but then when I moved here to Tehaleh, I found there's a great deal of interest in TERT, Tehaleh Emergency Response Team. And so I thought, wow, maybe my interest in ham radio might be helpful to somebody. I can dedicate battery power when it comes time to send more firefighting equipment here, or more sheets and pillows over there, or more food over there, and so forth. The kind of thing in health and welfare reports, that so-and-so is doing fine, according to his neighbors and things like that. We ham radio operators do a lot of that, and I thought it'd be nice to do on battery power. So I have an installation that I use for emergency power in my house. I have a single inverter that can do 2.5 kilowatts at a time, and I have it powered by batteries that are left over from a electric car that I built when I was in Florida. They're lithium batteries, and I have 12 of them left over, and I hook them up in such a way that I use my single panel up on the roof to power the batteries, charge the batteries, and then I use the batteries in the case of a power loss to run through an inverter. And I run extension cords to my refrigerator and a couple of other, maybe a little bit of lighting and so forth. And I can have a few hours of useful data, but not a lot. But then I use that battery system, which is good for 360 ampere hours or 4.8 kilowatt hours. I use it to charge another system, which is in my ham radio shack, which is a different voltage and it's only 36 ampere hours. So I'm good to power my big high frequency radio for maybe 4 or 5 hours on that battery charger. That's it. So these things probably won't interest you, but they're of great interest to me. Here's a quick picture of on the left are the batteries that are good for my whole house for a very short period of time. They're only good for about 4.8 kilowatt hours. And then on the right are a bunch of small batteries. These are the same kind of batteries that your laptop computer uses. These are called 18650 batteries, or lithium batteries. I have 48 of them connected up, just like my car has 7,000. It's just like a mini version of that. But I don't have any of the sophistication of the car. I don't have a heat pump or cooling or anything like that. Over on the right side is an Arduino, which is a little microprocessor that keeps track of state of charge of my batteries, power in, power out, and so forth. Over on the left side is a DC to DC converter. I'm actually using a 13.3 or 4 volt system to charge up batteries that are 16.8 volts. That's kind of a strange relationship. You have to have more voltage to charge lower voltage normally. So I have to use a little device on the left, which is called a DC to DC converter. It's very interesting to me and guys like Marty. Most of you are bored silly, so I'll move on. So when you want to get solar advice, you probably ought to do just a top of the back of the envelope kind of an audit of what are my needs. You can look on the back of your refrigerator and find a nameplate, and it'll say, this is how many amps or watts it takes. Multiply that by the number of hours a day you use, and you figure out what your amp hours or your watt hours per day are. And you can also do the same for your television and for your heater and for your, all the different devices, appliances in your house. Add another 10% for small appliances, like your little cell phone charger and things like that. And then you'll figure out what your needs are. And then you can do a solar audit. That's not too hard. You look at the dimensions of your roof, and you figure it takes about 100 square feet per kilowatt hour, and figure out how many panels might fit on your roof. You can do a rough, and the other thing is, if you back up against trees, like some of the folks in Rainier, on the one that you first come to, the one furthest to the east, it backs up against a big hill with a bunch of trees above that. Solar wouldn't work worth a hoot until you're up about noontime in the day for those houses. And my house is pretty close to the green belt. I'm only one house removed from it. And so I was worried about that, but it turns out it works pretty well at my house. But the house right next door to me is closer, wouldn't work so well at all. So you have to consider things like that. And if you have a south exposure on your roof, and if you have pretty good exposure to the sun, it might work well. Then the next thing you ought to do is go on to energysage.com, www.energysage.com. And they have a lot of solar data on there. So whether it makes sense, how it works, how much it costs, what are the rebates, all kinds of things like that, the usual questions. And in fact, a lot of this pitch was taken off their data there. And then the next thing you'll be offered is we can have 3 or more solar companies give you a call. They will actually come to your home, take a few measurements, put a device on your roof that measures how much sun you actually get. And then they can sit down and give you a very rosy pitch on, man, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm going to save you a lot of money. It'll be wonderful. And they will do break-even analysis. And when my guy did break-even analysis with me, he said it was going to be 6 years or so before I start making money on my solar. In other words, the first few years, I have to pay for it. Now, I didn't finance mine. I didn't take a loan out. That adds a couple of years for interest to pay for the loan if you take one, but it's still quite doable. And if you plan to live here for the next 20 years, or live that long, some of us are worried about that, then you have to take that into consideration too. Those are all things. And then my last point on this slide is be prepared for a lot of frustration when dealing with government help. Now, my politics are kind of showing through here, and I'll try to be very brief on this, but I had my solar panels on my roof for something like 3.5 months, generating lots of power in summer, not hooked to anything, while I waited for people to shuffle papers and approve this form or that form and come out and make this inspection and so forth. And I was one frustrated dude because I couldn't wait for it to start working. And when the inspector finally did come to my house, it was kind of sanctimonious. And I said, well, what am I going to get from this inspection? He said, I'm going to prevent your garage from burning down. And I said, well, look, I'm an engineer, and I think I know a little bit about this. Well, he flunked me on the inspection for 2 things. The first thing was I had installed my own Tesla power charger on my garage wall. And when I did so, I neglected to use the code-approved nut that attaches the conduit to my panel. And the code-approved nut, guess what? It's made by a particular manufacturer that breathed in the senator's ear and got them to put it into code that I must use the XYZ company's nut to hold my conduit. It had nothing to do with safety, and it took me 15 minutes to fix the problem. And the second reason I got rejected, and it added another 1.5 months to the process of getting approved, was that when my installers installed my system, they neglected to they put a bunch of signs all over it, but they neglected to put bakelite sign. It had to be made of a particular material. The font has to be so big and so forth. And it points out which meter is which. 1 meter is the net meter and the other meter is the production meter. Well, heck, anybody looking at the meters can know which meter is which. It had nothing to do with safety. It had to do with some bureaucratic rule, probably approved by some guy that breathed in the senator's review. Once again, I got frustrated, wrote nasty letters, and it didn't do any good. I had to wait for them. When the inspector was looking at my house and he told me he was going to prevent me from burning the house down, I said, well, great. I've got a ladder right here. You want to climb up on the roof and check out the installation, make sure they use the right gauge wire and use the right connectors and so on and so forth. And he said, I don't climb on roofs. And I said, for crying out loud, I checked it out. No, it's safe. Why don't you come up with me and I'll show you. Nope, I don't do that. I don't climb in the attic either. It's hot. So that's where all the wiring is and so forth. And there was a penetration of my roof that could be a problem. He didn't look at that. All he looked at was the panel to make sure I used the right kind of nuts when I installed my Tesla charger. I'm kind of angry about it, as you can tell. And prepare yourself for a big delay and a lot of frustration. This is an example of the kind of information that comes off of EnergySage.com. I just thought I'd show you, this is one of many, many plots they'll show you. And it shows what the market average price would be for a 5 kilowatt system in Washington and so on and so forth. So I'm down to my summary page now. I've talked long enough. Upfront cost is pretty high. It's I paid $3.83 per watt. So you can count on something on around, even though they said $2.80 something cents officially, I think it's going to be above that. There are labor costs and things that they don't account for. So you're going to pay somewhere upwards of $20,000 for a system that's of any size. If you don't have a reasonably large south-facing exposure, and if you don't have a tree coverage or a building next to you, like a water tower or something like that that blocks your sun, solar won't work well for you. If you go off the grid, and some of you are maybe thinking about that, oh boy, that's solar. Great, it's going to cost a lot more than you think. I don't think I'd even start that argument. Summary number 2, break-even analysis is difficult. I think in my case, it's around 7 years to break it against all the costs it had against the benefit that comes back. But if you challenge me, I won't be able to give you very many. I can't go out 3 decimal places and prove it. I encourage you to use a CPA or somebody who's less smart about finances than I am. Be prepared for unexpected expenses. For example, my installation and flow, here's another one that you'll be told by sales guys. When you install solar on your house, it makes your house more valuable. So whenever you die and your estate sells your house, it'll be worth more than your neighbor's house. Or if you decide you want to move next year or refinance, you're going to have an appraisal of your house, and your house will go up considerably because of your solar cell. My experience in Florida was not so. And the second problem was I had to remove my solar cells because I had lived there about 20 years. And it was time to replace my roof. So I had to remove all my solar cells, including all the mounting brackets and everything. Patch the holes, reinstall the shingles, reinstall the solar at my expense, and so on and so forth. And even then, the guy that bought my house was in the mode. It was a buyer's market, and as we negotiated back and forth, he said, I want your entire solar system, and I don't want to pay for it. So I ended up giving in on that and had to pay to have all the shingles replaced the second time. So there are downsides that you might not have predicted. Typical warranty on solar cells is around 20 years, 25 years. And was that true for you, Barney, about 25 years? 25 years warranty on the panels? Yeah, that's pretty much what mine are. I think that's standard. But I have reason to believe that they will last a good bit longer than that. So rebates and political incentives, pay some attention to them, but don't trust them implicitly. I have a very negative experience, as I explained, and hopefully you won't, but I ended up having my life insurance canceled because I didn't pay back my life insurance loan quickly enough because I was banking on government doing what they said they would do. And it was very annoying. I had to reestablish all my life insurance and everything. Very, very painful. I'm glad that I installed solar on my house, but it may not be right for you. And my next slide says, bottom line, solar makes more sense if you drive an EV. I know most of you don't. But for me, I drive completely for free. And I charge at solar charging, well, some of them are solar, but at Tesla superchargers, they're like gas stations for electric cars. And I pay not a nickel for them. And now if you buy a Tesla now, you do pay, but not much, nowhere near as much as you do for gasoline. And when I'm at home, it's free too, because I make a lot more energy than I burn when I drive. So it's a really nice thing. I did it in Florida too with a homemade electric car and I liked it very much. There's a quick snapshot of what they look like from the roof before I had any landscaping in my house. And I've got some frequently asked questions, but I'll let you read those and look at those if you can read them, and open the floor to questions. I hear you, Roger. I see your lips. Barney, it looks like you're saying something.
Yeah, I just turned my mic on. Can you hear me okay?
Good. I hear you fine.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for the lecture today.
Thank you.
We've had a similar experience as you in the positive realm. We haven't had any really negative experience except for the part where, you know, when the grid cuts off, when there's a power failure, our solar panels automatically cut off. So I invested in a battery pack. I have some Yeti batteries, and I have 2 solar panels portable that I can put outside to charge it if I use up all that energy. Like if our grid failure is more than 2 or 3 days, and I'm going to need to, you know, recharge my battery pack. So
we have enough battery pack to last us a week. In theory, we've never actually tested it, but
well, it only goes to 4 circuits in the house, but it's the needy ones: our refrigerator, our microwave, the lights in the kitchen, and all the electrical outlets in the kitchen.
What about the hot tub? That's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe not the electric blanket, huh?
Yeah, well, your battery is much bigger than mine, but it's a similar system.
Yeah, and we get 14 cents per kilowatt hour back from PSE.
So you installed after I did, I think. The incentives changed, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it started out at 16.
Yeah, so
I was 18, yeah.
So the incentives are...
Do you know if they offer it now? If Roger were to install it tomorrow, would he get an incentive like that?
I don't think so.
They go away in 22, but they went down every year. Stepping down might be 12 cents now. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
it's still a nice benefit.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, we got our first incentive refund check back, and we haven't paid an electric bill except that $7.49 for over a year now.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So and of course we have an electric vehicle and we charge it. We charge it. So we've never used more than we've produced. Our system is an excellent system. Sounds
like it's working really well.
So I would encourage anybody who is interested to talk to us about it. I'd be more than happy to sit down and show you all of our stuff, numbers, and what the come-ons were from the different providers of solar systems. But we have a preferred vendor that we recommend people to use.
I'm glad you do, because I won't recommend the guy that did mine. I mentioned that you can monitor how it's doing.
Yeah,
and it works great. And it works great as long as I'm home. When I go on vacation and I turn off my computer, which I don't normally turn off, but I leave my modem on and everything should be working, it goes to 0. And I've asked them at least 20 times to come out and look at that and determine what the problem is, and they just ignore me. So based on that, I wouldn't recommend them to anybody.
Yeah, our app is on our cell phone, and we can see it from anywhere, anytime. But there's a lot of nuts and bolts to this, and it is an investment. Ours will take 10 and a half years to completely pay for itself. But
we also got a $10,000 federal credit.
Yeah, we got 10,000 federal credit, plus we got the 14 cents, plus
there's one other credit I forgot to mention, and that is if you buy now, it wasn't true when we bought, but if you buy now, they will negate the sales tax. So you can save a lot of money. That's 9%.
That's quite a bit.
That's quite a bit. So that's another incentive, which I think goes away next year.
Yeah, our company has a contract with International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They gave us a $500 rebate. That's gone down to $250 now.
But yours is a bigger system. You have a 30 panel system, and I've only got a 20 panel. So your payback time is going to be longer.
Yeah, right. But it's you know, if you it's well worth it if you ask me, especially if you have an electric.
Really doing. Sounds like it's really doing the job.
Yeah, the thing that appeals most to me is my technical bed. I love the way it works. No moving parts. And, very reliable. It's just terrific. Well, we've lost most of our members. They got bored silly. But anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah, please.
Do you have gas heater, water heater, or do you have electric?
Gas.
Okay. Okay. And Barney, who was your installer?
Our installer was a company called Artisan, and but we reviewed 2 or 3 different companies before we went with them, but we went with them, and then surprisingly, you know, we had to get the art committee to approve the installation. And our next door neighbor said, "Wow, you're putting solar on your house? We were thinking of that too." And then they did it as well. I don't know where that humming is coming from.
I don't either.
Sorry, that probably was a call coming in on my cell phone.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Didn't realize you could hear that. Sorry.
Probably some ham radio operator.
I did look into the electric hot water heater, and the on-demand type would be the most efficient if you're going to change from gas to electric. And so when our hot water heater dies, I would do that. But generally, they're good for about 20, 25 years anyway.
Right. Right. Why did you pick the installer over the other 2?
I think the incentives were
Oh, the incentives were better. The product line, you know, you can buy solar cells, you know, from different manufacturers. We preferred the style, the look, and the efficiency of the ones they were selling, which was LG, and what else? Just the personality, the honesty, the
attention to detail.
Attention to detail, the depth. I mean, it was just excellent. It's a professional done presentation. They come to your house. Of course, they check out your position on your house, sun patterns, and they just did so many other things and explained them to us more than the others did.
In my case, I chose on the wrong basis. I wouldn't recommend anybody do it, base their decision the way I did. I knew the incentives were going to change very soon.
Yeah.
I wanted to get in on the incentives, so I called half a dozen different companies. In fact, one of them I had been communicating with for quite a long time from Florida. They asked me even before we moved here, you know, what it would be like. And he was very good to me and answered all my questions. And I really wanted to. So when I got here, I called him first, and he said, "Hey, I'm booked until January. There's no way I could get you in time for the incentives." So then I tried 4 other companies, and they were all booked. And finally, I found one company that wasn't booked. Should have told me something. And I called them in, and they gave a pretty good presentation. I will say, when they came to install, from soup to nuts, from the moment they arrived to the moment they departed, they were done in about 4 hours. It was unbelievable. They were so efficient. They did a great job installing. But then the customer service was just awful.
Do they guarantee that the power company will accept it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
it has to be inspected. It has to be inspected by the state and PS. has to be inspected. Once they do it all, it has to be inspected before they turn it on, before they activate it. You have to pass inspection and PSC, and you have to have that meter, that second meter put on your house, which costs another $100 to PSC. So there's a lot of steps, and
don't forget to go to your HOA first and fill out your application.
yeah, the ARC application, because it's something you're sticking on top of your house. And initially they wanted to run all the wires outside of the house and conduit down the side of the house, and I said, no, I want it up in the attic, you know. And so they did that.
But they gave us lots of reasons why they do it the other way. You know, they're very safety minded about your shingles and going through your roof and how that might cause. So it's buyer beware, you know, in terms of that. But they let us know the problems that might occur because of that.
But I wasn't impressed with the inspector. You know, you say it buys you safety, it really doesn't. He didn't look at anything. He never even climbed in the attic, and that's where the fire would probably start.
I have a question about if you have a generator, does that cause a problem for your power?
They can coexist.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to go with a gasoline powered generator because I didn't want to store gasoline in my garage or around the house somewhere because it's flammable. And I mean, if we're going to have any kind of disaster around here, it's going to be a large fire or an earthquake. I doubt, I'm hoping we'll never see Rainier explode, but we're certainly going to have an earthquake soon, and we can have a wildfire, a forest fire here any summer.
Yeah, like Barney, I had some problems with gasoline generators too, and it's mostly because I lived in Florida so much. We had a lot of hurricanes, had a lot of practice with this. And usually, if you haven't started your generator for a while, it's going to fail on the day you need it. And the other thing is, it makes a lot of noise and a lot of fumes. And like you, I'm really bothered by storing gasoline. You know, we Americans store, 5-gallon cans of gasoline, 4 and 5 at a time, right in a tightly packed area in our garage. Man, I learned in the Navy a lot of firefighting and things like that. We had to have gasoline for our portable pumps, and it was the most dangerous substance we had on the ship. Except maybe nuclear weapons, but that's a different issue. The point is, the amount of energy in a 5-gallon can of gasoline is unbelievable, and it's not a good thing to store.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is I have a generator, but it's natural gas.
Oh, that's good.
I don't store any gas for it.
That's great.
We keep our battery banks stored up all the time. We make sure that they're topped off all the time so that if the power goes out, we know we have 8 days, and in the meantime, we can stick our portable panels out and, get them charging the batteries back up again.
Is that a Tesla wall or is it different?
No, it's a Yeti. The brand is Yeti, and it's a portable system that campers use or people that in RVs use. I have a 3000, a Yeti 3000, and four other battery tanks, 2.5 kilowatts per feet. So it's a battery. So just battery in series. And then when your power goes out, you just take the plug from the back of the battery and stick it into your
dedicated
fuse box, your circuit.
Okay.
And then it runs.
What's a Tesla wall? What is there? Same thing or just a newer version?
Yeah. What type of batteries does yours use, Barney? Are they lead acid?
Yes.
Yeah. The Tesla wall uses lithium, cobalt, manganese batteries, and they are really the cat's meow when it comes to batteries. They're really, really nice batteries. They have a great deal of energy density. The charge cycles, the lifetime, the shelf life, everything about them is really, really superior.
They must be expensive.
They are expensive. I think it's about $7,500 per battery pack. Most houses need 2, and then you need all the other stuff too. It comes to about, I think, $35,000, $40,000 for a house like ours.
Oh wow!
But it's really, really nice, especially if you have an electric car.
Especially if you have what?
An electric vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
That's been very helpful, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I know it's
A lot
not
of research here for us.
I like technical things and other people don't, but I enjoy talking about this. And I have two other subjects I can talk about too, and one of them is electric vehicles in general. Might generate some conversation. And the other would be cutting the cord. If you are tired of paying bills every month to your provider for entertainment, rural representatives. And I can talk to either of those subjects and have before for the active learners, but Roger was desperate. He needed somebody to talk, and I said, "Look, I'll just."
Hey, Dave, you came through for us. I really appreciate it. Next week, we expect to have Stacy, the new director at the food bank in Bonnie Lake, who has done a phenomenal job through this very difficult time. And she'll have some update information as how they survived this far. And she's very interesting to listen to. And next week she'll be fascinating as well. Thanks again, David, for a marvelous presentation. And thanks to you, Brittany, for making it happen.
My pleasure.
Yeah, good to see
Bye,
everybody.
everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.